On this episode of Life in a Tide Pool, find out if this animal is alive or dead, can crabs regrow lost legs, and how can lobsters and crabs grow in size when their shells are so hard and rigid. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Eunice, and today we're going to be exploring the tide pools here at Woods Cove, Laguna Beach, California. We are going to learn all about crabs and lobsters today while we explore the tide pools at Woods Cove. Woods Cove is located in South Laguna and features a small cove with 3 distinct tide pool regions. The southern section is a bit rough and does not feature the diversity of marine life as the other sections do. The middle section is accessible only at low tide, but features high vertical surfaces that are perfect for marine animals to attach to. This is a great place to see the various zones in a tide pool in a single location. The northern section is more of a flat bench and also only accessible at lower tides. Today we will focus on the northern section, as it features all of the tide zones, has lots of diversity, and we have a great chance to see the various types of crabs commonly found in a tide pool. I'm going to meet a colleague of mine, Professor Daniel Zacharel, who will help us find a few crabs, but also help us learn about these fascinating animals. Tell me about this pool right here.
Okay, so there's a lot going on in this pool. Okay, so you can see there's all kinds of encrusting algae, all of these fleshy algae that are growing in here.
Right.
Yep, lots of urchins in the crevices. Looks like a very high diversity tide pool with anemones. I see sculpin, and I'm looking for opali. I'm expecting...
I saw a few tucked back in there earlier.
Okay.
We saw them.
Sure.
So a couple little tiny little crabs here too.
Yes.
Like this big, and of course they're running away from me, right?
Yeah. Well, so there's 2 types of shore crabs that are really common in this area. One is the line shore crab, Pachygrapsis. That's
okay.
Very, very common. And then we also have some hermit crab species, one in particular, Pagurus semuellus, the blue striped hermit crab, and it's really quite common in Southern California.
So the blue stripes, where are they on its claws?
Oh, it's on their walking legs.
Okay.
You'll see really distinctive blue bands. So they're actually called the blue banded hermit crab.
So here's more of your crabs scurrying away.
Oh yeah.
So now why do they scurry away when we even get near them?
Well, that's protective. You know, they probably recognize that we're potential predators. You know, the most common predators are really seagulls and believe it or not, raccoons come down into the intertidal.
I've heard of that a lot.
There we go. So I'm guessing that anytime we cast a shadow over them,
they're going to take off and run.
They're gone. They're probably reacting to that.
So here's another pool kind of right in front of us here.
Sure.
Again, we see anemones. A little less, it's calmer here, right?
Yeah, it's a little calmer. I actually see quite a lot of a particular alga. That really bright green algae is called ulva.
Okay.
And it's probably the most delicious algae out here. Everybody loves to eat ulva.
Everybody, if you're an algae, you're an herbivore.
If you're a crab, in particular.
Do crabs eat algae?
They do. Actually, the line shore crab that we were talking about earlier, that Pachygrapsis, it's probably feeding on algae more than anything else.
Really?
I thought and ulva is going to be a particular favorite of it. It'll scavenge dead animals.
Okay.
And in fact, it's known to eat limpets.
Really?
But really, it's primarily scraping algae off the rock and eating algae like ulva.
So I'm looking at this nice little area here, and so I want to talk a little bit more about crabs. And so that looks to me what's a little hermit crab right there, right?
Yeah, so this is that blue banded hermit crab we were talking about earlier.
I gotcha.
It's living in a whelk shell, so living in a snail shell.
What happens when the hermit crab wants to grow and get bigger? What do they do?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. All crabs, regardless of whether they're hermit crabs or not, have an exoskeleton. And that's a skeleton on the outside of their body. So to grow, they actually have to molt that exoskeleton. They have to shed it. They grow in a big pulse when they have a soft exoskeleton before it hardens again. If you're a hermit crab, you start life, you have to find, remember those little periwinkle snails?
Up over there,
yeah, well actually those small periwinkle snails make really great houses for very small hermit crabs.
Okay.
But as the hermit crabs grow and molt, They not only have to molt their own exoskeleton, they also have to shed the house they're living in, and they have to move into a bigger accommodation. And so they are constantly in search of a larger snail shell to move into. So, you know, here you might notice there are some of these periwinkle shells filled with little
tiny
juvenile hermit crabs, and then we have this larger whelk snail shell with an adult hermit crab.
Is it fair to say then hermit crabs can only live where there's other snails where they can use their shells to live and grow into?
That's right, and in fact there's been some really interesting research done that shows that that empty shells are a limiting resource. So hermit crabs actually sometimes battle over these empty shells. They're not just plentiful. And there have been actually studies that have shown that they're kind of particular about the shell they're in. They prefer a particular species that has a particular density of shell, or they'll prefer
a shape of shell, things like this?
That's right. They also prefer shells that are undamaged over shells that are damaged, and that makes perfect sense, right? You wouldn't want to move into a house with big holes in the wall, right?
So I bet there's a lot of competition for the shells. So if I'm a hermit crab, is it the same thing in the natural environment, a hermit crab looking for shells? If I'm bigger, the badder, stronger, I'm gonna get that shell.
Absolutely, and you can actually, if you're a very observant tide pool practitioner, you can go out there, hang out by the tide pools, and sometimes you can actually see those hermit crabs battling, one trying to draw the other out of its shell.
I've seen them just grabbing onto each other, 3 or 4 at a time, pulling each other away.
They can. They sometimes can get into those battles, yeah.
Okay, great.
That's right.
Let's go take a look at this pool over here.
Sure, sounds great.
So I'm looking at this nice pool over here in front of me, and I see a lot of algae over here.
Yeah.
And of course the water is rushing up here like this.
Yeah, it's just beautiful.
So what are some of the conditions and some of the factors animals living in this particular area have to worry about?
Well, there's really high velocity water. You can see that pouring over, back and over. And actually for animals living in the intertidal area, believe it or not, that can be a preferred habitat, because it's delivering this cool, nutrient-rich water continuously to the animals and the plants.
So we have a lot of delivery of water, the nutrients and food, but they're going to have to really, really hang on tightly here. So what are the adaptations to hang on for your dear life in this?
Okay, so for the algae, for example, they've got these amazing holdfasts that are incredibly strong, can handle just a ton of wave force.
Right, I can see all the holdfasts, just thick things down there.
Mussels, have their abyssal threads that also incredibly strong, and then a lot of the more mobile animals, like the crabs that we were talking about earlier, they can take shelter in the cracks and crevices. And you'll remember we just saw
a couple over there, right.
A couple of those Pachygrapsis crabs just clambered away, so they're clearly perfectly happy in this habitat.
So initially I would think the animals living here in this specific pool, things that could withstand very significant wave action like that. Would I see things that may not survive wave action here, like some of the things that can escape?
Actually, in this particular pool, we're probably not going to see necessarily a lot of fish, because there's so much activity in the water, and the water is getting completely drawn out each time with each exiting wave. And so this isn't necessarily going to be a location where a fish is going to hang out.
I want to look over here and I want to talk about some of the competitions for space here. I see a lot of different types of algae.
Yes.
I'm going to see a lot of different types of animals. How do they compete for space in something like this here?
Well, it's interesting. That algae, the really bright green algae, that's called ulva. It's actually not a super good space competitor, but what it is it's a really fast grower. And it's a good colonizer, so it reproduces really rapidly. It's an example of an organism where you're in a tide pool like this. If some of the other algae gets grazed upon or pulled away or sheared away by a storm, then that ulva can be one of the first alga species to move into the area. And so what you have is this sort of gradient of ones that are fast growing and good colonizers against some of the slower growing algae that have stronger holdfasts. So they put more resources into and being more competitive.
So what types of factors or animals would remove the stuff currently growing on this rock to allow some other animals to colonize on it?
Oh, I see. So, it's going to be factors like either grazing pressure, so a grazer is going to come through and graze the algae all the way down to the rock, to the bare rock, or you might have a really significant storm surge with stronger than normal wave forces, and that can shear the algae off of the rock and clear empty space.
And then allow some of the other faster growers, maybe not as competitive stuff, to actually settle on that space, grab a foothold. cold?
That's correct. And in Southern California, sometimes we have these, Santa Ana winds that blow through, and we can have, if a Santa Ana wind event happens to coincide with a time when low tide is happening in the middle of the day, then you can actually get some localized mortality in some of these algae.
Because of desiccation drying out?
That's right, absolutely.
Right, because they're just not used to they have to have water all over them and stuff.
Well, they can handle quite a bit, so it'd have to be a really exceptional Santa Ana event to cause that kind of mortality, but it does happen.
Tide pools are very fragile and sensitive ecosystems. Human impact can have dramatic effects on the numbers and diversity of marine life. Cities like Laguna Beach have established marine protection programs that help preserve these amazing tide pool locations, not only for our generation, but for future generations as well. So I want to introduce you to the Marine Protection Officer, Jeremy Fremond, who's going to tell us a little bit more about what the Marine Protection Officer does. Jeremy, thank you so much for having us here today and sharing us your information. So what does a Marine Protection Officer do?
Well, first off, thanks for having me today, Casey. The Marine Protection Officer wears many hats in this city. Our primary thing that we do here is patrol our coastline, looking to enforce and uphold fishing regulation, local and state regulations. We also work with a lot of government agencies such as Fish and Wildlife and NOAA, and then we get to educate school groups and the general public about how special this coastline is and what we do and don't do when we come and visit here.
So I noticed on the way in, many of the parks, I think maybe all of Laguna, they're designated as MPAs. So what is an MPA?
Good question, Casey. A marine protected area is a stretch of coastline that's been designated by the government as special, for lack of a better word. So there's different types of zoning within a marine protected area, but basically it's a varying degree of take and no take. Most of these places are closed down and you can't take any wildlife or any shells or any organic material, as we say.
So why is it important for marine protection officers and not just other people to preserve our marine environment, specifically the tide pools here, like at Woods Cove?
Well, this is a very special area we have. There's a lot of people in Southern California and a lot of people that come to the beach, and we could very quickly, intentionally or unintentionally, just by our presence, deplete the resources here. And specifically with the intertidal is a lot of our local marine life and what we'd see when we're snorkeling or scuba diving around, they start their lives in the tide pools. It's a safe spot when they're just little baby fish, and then as they grow, they eventually make their way out. So if we deplete the intertidal there, then the bigger fish will never make it out.
So tell me, what's one of your favorite parts of your job?
Well, I'm a total water child, so I love anytime I can be on or in the water and or near it and just interacting with the public. I love talking to people and educating people about how special this area really is.
There are several really good resources visitors can go to learn more about crabs and other marine life. I went to visit my friends at the Santa Monica Pier Aquarium to see if they had any crabs on display and to learn more about the different types of crabs in our local tide pools. This is just an incredible tide pool or a touch tank area here. I see lots and lots of different animals. But today I'm very interested in the types of crabs.
Yes.
But I see we have a few crabs here, but before I touch them, what are some of the proper tide pool etiquette and touch tank etiquette I should be aware of?
That's a perfect question. We have something here at the aquarium called the 2-finger rule.
Okay.
And we just ask that everyone touch the animals gently with 2 fingers. With 1 finger, sometimes you're not sure if you're poking, but a good gauge is to touch the back of your hand. If you see white, you're pressing a little too hard, but gentle hands make for happy animals.
I think I see one right under here. He's hiding from us. Can I actually go see him?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So what is this you're showing me now?
This is actually a northern kelp crab who does not want to move.
Okay. So northern kelp crab. So I'm assuming he's going to live on the kelp, like he's actually holding on to
just like the kelp. And the color of their shells actually match the diet that they feed on too. The more green algae they eat, the greener their shells. The more red algae, the redder, and brown and so on.
So if I look at him, he's eating red algae? Is that?
He has been eating red algae, and if they change their diet, their colors will actually reflect in their next molts when they grow.
Great. So I can, in 2 fingers, I can touch him.
Yeah.
We'll put him back in the water really soon.
Exactly.
So he's got some pretty sharp claws here. So what are those
Yes, they
claws
do.
used for?
Their claws primarily for grabbing onto the kelp, tearing off pieces of the kelp. They have very sharp ends on their legs as well because
Wow,
they
I
live
can
in the rocky shore areas.
Right.
So this way they can actually climb up the rocks and be able to attach themselves to it.
Okay, great. So Jenna, I see in your hand right here,
Mm-hmm.
this is pretty much a hermit crab I see, right?
Yes, this
So
is.
Tell us a little bit more about these hermit crabs.
This is a blue-banded hermit crab. They're actually one of the more common species you'll find along the Pacific coast.
Okay.
And hermit crabs are a pretty neat animal. They do have an exoskeleton like other crabs and lobsters, and that usually is what protects them with that hard shell. Their shell is a little bit softer. That's why you find them actually living in snail shells for extra protection.
So the hermit crabs don't have their own shell themselves.
They do have a shell, it's just softer. So that's why they move into snail shells, just for extra protection.
So here's a question I love to ask. So as the crabs get bigger, what do? How do they grow?
They grow, they actually molt. They molt just like the other crabs and lobsters do, and actually a lot of insects in the world. And they do it by actually, they grow the soft shell first, they squeeze out through the back of the shell, and then they
Okay.
actually grow the new harder shell. And hermit crabs will climb out of snail shells and look for bigger shells as well as they grow bigger.
So very much like some of the lobster molts that I see walking on the shore, exact
Yeah.
same thing where they break apart and they come out, right?
That's
And
right, the
how they
hermit
grow.
crabs do the same thing, and then they move into a larger shell.
So you said this is a blue-banded?
Blue-banded hermit crab.
Do we
yes.
have other types of hermit crabs in Southern California?
There are other types. One
Okay.
other common species you'll find would be the furry hermit crab. They grow to a larger size, and they actually look like they have fur and hair all over
Really?
their claws. Yeah.
Okay. How do you feed one of your hermit crabs in here?
That's a great question. We feed them micro. We call them little pieces of squid and fish that we cut up for them.
Right.
So
Okay.
the kelp crabs, they eat the giant kelp that we put in the tanks as well. Again, it's their favorite food.
I see these little pieces of food over here, and that's what the kelp crab's just going to come eat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So how do you, I guess, ensure the hermit crabs get to eat something? Because if I'm a fish, I'm simply going to eat his dinner. How do you
Yeah, it's true.
manage that?
Our aquarists are very careful with trying to make sure that they spot feed. So they're making sure that they find the crabs and making sure that everyone will get a little piece of food before they're done.
So far, we've only seen a few species of crabs in our tide pools. Lobsters are similar to crabs in that they have a hard outer shell, but they have 10 legs instead of 8 legs that crabs have. Lobsters, however, live in the lower tidal sections and are rarely seen in tide pools. Lobsters and crabs are commercially harvested and sold in most all of our local markets. I had the opportunity to visit my favorite fishmonger, Tommy Gomes, at Catalina Offshore Products to learn more about these very tasty crustaceans. I see those crabs over there. So what kind of crabs are those right there?
These are local stone crabs harvested with a lobster trap.
Really?
Yeah, so they both crawl along the bottom and everything. It's not a really big giant trap like you see on Discovery Channel TV and
Right.
stuff like that. But these guys here, this is a stone crab, local. You can see him struggling with me here. This is where the expression, "Don't be a crabby face." Look at that. That right there is a face only a mother could love.
These claws are huge. Now this is where the meat is in the crabs,
Yeah,
right?
there's meat all up into here. The legs have a little bit of meat. There's a little bit of crab meat in the head, but there's also what we call crab butter up in there.
So what's
That's
crab butter?
It's a creamy fat that's really nice on a cracker.
Now you said are these local, you said?
These are local right here off of Point Loma.
Wow. Now will people visiting the tide pools, will we see these animals up in the tide pools, or these live further down in the water?
This size are definitely deeper, but you will see crabs in and amongst the rocks of the tide pools and stuff, so very cool. Along Shelter Island, Harbor Island, in the jetties and the rocks, you see little kids fishing them with a piece of chicken and a string.
Right. How do we tell the difference between the males and the females of crabs?
The bigger flat, here, hold that claw.
Oh, you sure?
Yeah, don't let go.
I won't.
The bigger flap down here, this flap, the females opens up and actually the eggs get carried in there.
Right.
All right, hold on. Okay, I got them.
This looks like it can hurt.
Definitely.
So have you ever been bitten by this crab claw?
Not as many as times as I've bitten them, but yeah, it hurts. They can definitely make you scream.
Now, how do we tell if this is a good crab or a bad crab?
Well, size and the shell density if the shell is nice and hard,
Okay.
it's already finished its molt and it's coming back into a healthier stage, so the meat's going to be a little sweeter.
Gotcha.
And you want to look around for barnacles that might have eaten into the shell and cause a lesion and stuff like that. This guy is really clean. You can see he lost a couple of legs in his battles throughout, but overall this is a pretty good looking crab. When harvesting this in a sustainable manner, which they do down in Baja in California, they take one of the claws off and then they throw the animal back with the other claw, and the claw will rejuvenate itself.
This ability for crabs to regrow limbs is a remarkable characteristic that is very rare in the animal kingdom. This ability is also found in another common tidal animal, the sea star. The missing limbs of the crab will take between 2 and 3 years for adults to regenerate. The regrowth occurs after the crab has shed its exoskeleton and before the new shell has had a chance to harden. I have some questions about the lobster. What's the difference between a Pacific lobster and an Atlantic lobster?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask that. Everybody asks that question. About $15 to $18 a pound for one. The West Coast lobster, it's kind of like which team's better, the Yankees or the Mets, or the Yankees and the Dodgers. I mean, come on, they're both in the major league. Me personally, nothing better than a West Coast lobster.
Right, so the Atlantic lobsters, when I see them in the store, they have like rubber bands over the claws.
Yeah.
Those are the Atlantic lobsters.
Correct. And there's a reason why they have the rubber band over the claws.
Why?
Because you don't want to get pinched by those claws. They're very powerful. So just like the East Coast lobster has the claws for protection, these are spiny lobsters, which are very, very spiny all over. I mean, if you can run your hand up this way and it's smooth, you go the other way and you're going to get poked a million times. One of the major defense mechanisms for this is you see these spines right here?
Wow.
These little pointed spines. When they curl, you can actually see them lock into each other, and they become a shield of armor and they pinch. So it's very neat.
What about the spines?
You know,
the
this is also used for fishing, getting up into nooks and crannies, and they wiggle them around, and they're smooth going this way, but when you go the other way, they're really, really sharp and they hang up. This guy's not very happy with me right now.
No, I can tell.
And so this is actually a female with no eggs.
How can you tell?
See the feathers?
Oh yeah, right there.
Yeah, those are the feathers, and the eggs. The eggs would be attached underneath there, and these would be covering the eggs in order to protect them from being picked off by other predators like a sheephead or a sculpin or even a moray eel for that fact.
So why is it having its tail contract all the time? Is that a defense mechanism?
He's not happy. Yeah, it's a total defense mechanism. You got to remember he's out of the water. He can last like this for quite some time.
Really?
But he's still out of his element.
Is there specific seasons when people can harvest lobsters on the West Coast here?
It's the most well-managed commercial fishery, I say, anywhere. So second Wednesday in October all the way through March. Not everybody can go fish them commercially. It is a limited entry program. You have to wait for someone to either sell their boat and permit, or you have to get in on the lottery, which isn't going to happen. So, but you can go out recreationally and use a hoop net and harvest them for your family's consumption. You don't want to get caught selling them. So measuring a lobster is done with a lobster measuring device, and you need to make sure that that device is properly made, not stamped out and shipped over here from someplace, because this is a highly valuable resource, and having a short lobster is very, very expensive. Even a hair short, literally. And I'll explain that. You measure right between the horn and the edge of the shell. Now, at the edge of the shell, you see those hairs? You can pick those up. That's what I mean by even if it's a hair short, you're gonna get in trouble.
Love it.
Most commercial fishermen, not all of them, most of the old school commercial fishermen When they're harvesting the females, if it has eggs, they're going to throw it back.
Right.
Even at $20 a pound. That's what the fishermen get paid.
Wow.
$20 a pound. Even if it at that price, they're going to throw it back because they're thinking about future stocks.
Right.
But not all fishermen think like that. There's still some of us commercial fishermen that think that they need to catch it all, kill it all, sell it all. But we have to think about sustainability of not only the species, but the sustainability of our lifestyle as a commercial fisherman.
One of the more interesting things to see when walking on the beach in Southern California is a lobster or a crab molt. The lobster molts are most common in the late summer, as this is when most adults shed their outer shell and begin to grow. The molts are not a dead lobster, but simply the discarded outer shell. This behavior is similar to the way snakes shed their skin periodically. Additional information about any of the animals and locations featured on this episode can be found at our website at lifeinatidepool.com.